Welcome everyone to our webinar. Happy Tuesday. We're really excited to take a deep dive into CLM and building out a successful CLM process for your team. Whether you already have a system, you're looking to improve your process, maybe you're just dipping your toes into the research, or you're really beginning your search for a CLM or legal tech in general. Maybe you're looking to hone the craft of legal tech. There will be something for you. So thank you all for joining us. Just some quick housekeeping. This session will be recorded and you will get the session sent out to you after the webinar along with the slides. And there is a Q&A box, so please feel free to use that throughout and we will get to your questions. If we don't get to them during the webinar, we will be sure to reach out to you after. Just a quick agenda. We're going to start by defining really what CLM is, what legal tech is, and how to determine when it's time to make a change. We'll outline some key considerations when building a plan, including enablement, which is very crucial, which we will get to, and also how to measure post-implementation success and what those metrics are that you should be looking at. Before we get into all of that, I do want to introduce our panelists. First, I'm Mary. I'm on the growth marketing team at LinkSquares. I've been working in legal tech since 2019. I'll be your MC for today's call, and I'm happy to introduce the real stars of the show, Jonathan Ashland, and LinkSquares customer and triathlete, Shawn Hoyt. So I will pass it to Jonathan first to introduce himself.
Hi, thanks so much for taking the time out. I am the Vice President of Legal here at LinkSquares. I've worked at now 4 companies where we've either built our own contract management process and solution, or we've used a vendor solution. And so I have a decent amount of experience in managing the contract process through technology, and I'm really excited to talk today.
Thank you. Ashlyn?
Hi, my name is Ashlyn Donahue. I'm the Director of Legal here at LinkSquares. Similar to Jonathan, I have some experience and background either building and managing homegrown CLM solutions or implementing third-party providers for your departments and teams. And so really excited to talk about this, and thanks for joining us today.
Awesome. Shawn?
Yes, thank you. Shawn Hoyt. I am the Vice President of Commercial Legal at OutSystems. OutSystems is a company that has a development platform for rapid development of applications. It's kind of called the low-code, no-code market. If you're familiar with that, we've been around for over 20 years and have customers in over 80 countries. And it's an exciting global challenge that we face at OutSystems. Like my other esteemed panelists, I have either implemented a homegrown or purchased CLM solution 3 times. And excited to talk about and share all of our experiences.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. To kick things off, I did want to share just a quick stat about the legal tech market as a whole. Based on some research by Gartner, it was estimated that the legal tech industry will reach about 50 billion in valuation by 2027, which is doubling its stat from 2022. So it's quite exciting. But I also want to define what legal tech is. It's kind of a vague term. Even when you Google the term, it usually comes up with something along tech for legal, which is not exactly helpful. So basically for CLM, we just want to outline the fact that it's nuanced, and it really will depend on the size of your company. It'll depend on your role at your company. It'll depend on the teams that you want to get involved with your legal tech solution or your CLM solution, and how well you actually define your process ahead of time, which is what we will get into today. We know that organizations really need to transform their processes, especially as new technology comes out, whether it's AI, which is a really big buzzword and topic right now. But we want to make sure that we can help you manage your CLM initiatives and hopefully really become a better business partner and increase business performance across the org. With that, I want to pass it to Ashlyn, who really is our legal tech and legal ops expert at LinkSquares. So I'll pass it to Ashlyn to kind of define what legal tech or CLM is to you.
Yeah, so I think for me, legal tech is really leveraging technology solutions to optimize and empower the way that legal works, not only within its department, but with cross-functional business stakeholders. I think that's one of the things that I really like to hone in on when talking about legal tech is it's not just for legal. legal often sits as the center hub for so many different business teams, and legal has the opportunity to really play a key role in ensuring that they're optimizing the way that they partner and work together to not only support legal's processes, but also their stakeholders' processes through, enabling, whether that's automation or efficiencies through technical solutions.
Awesome. Thank you. So moving on about understanding really the why behind legal tech. We've defined it, but now let's look at like when it's time to actually make that change. We know things can be super hectic. They always are. It can be really easy to live with systems that are maybe outdated or processes that are suboptimal, but you don't always have the chance to do something about them. It's often easier just to get the things done that you need to get done. So at some point, you probably hit an inflection point or you recognize that it's time to make a change. I'd love to pass it to Shawn to really talk through when you thought it was time to make a change within your organizations. I know you've implemented a CLM solution twice now, so I'm curious to hear from you about what that inflection point was for you.
Well, one of the things that ended up being fascinating across those two experiences is that the companies' profiles were completely different. And yet, despite those differences, it led me to the same conclusion, which is that I needed some legal technology. In one case, it was a small company that had a relatively small number of contracts, but the contracts were highly complex and highly variable and had very large size in terms of dollar amount. So there's a lot at stake and a lot of variation between those contracts, even though they were small in number. Where I am now, each individual contract might be smaller and there's more standardization between the contracts, but the volume is massively higher. And so I usually think about it is when I talk to people is, do you have a lot of variation among your contracts? And do you have a high level of volume of contracts? I think if either of those is yes, you may be a candidate for CLM. If the answer to both of those is no, it might be too early. So then what I say is, okay, what are your pain points? Like, where do you really run into frustrations or difficulties? Is it that people are complaining that contracts take too long to process? Is it that the stakeholders feel like they can't find the status? It feels like a black box. They don't know where things are at any given time. Or maybe you're being asked to, go out and research an issue across your contracts, and it takes you hours and hours to do that. So in those situations, it kind of indicates that, okay, maybe you need a CLM. And then the third piece of it is, okay, your existing tools, like, are they adequate? Maybe you're still using Excel. Maybe you're using some kind of a ticketing system. Maybe you've put in some Salesforce workflows. And if those homegrown solutions aren't enough to address those pain points, I think it's usually time for a CLM.
Awesome. Thank you. Jonathan, I know you always talk about what is the problem that you're trying to solve. I'd love to hear from what that means for you.
Yeah, I think Shawn said it. There's different problem sets that a legal department is going to face that might make technology an attractive solution to solve the problem. But it's really important to identify those problems. And I think there's probably some additional ones to what Shawn said, but I think those are the basic ones, really. Are you having issues with working in a pre-signature before you've gotten your contract signed? And essentially, when you're negotiating these contracts, do you have a problem with the collaboration, with templates, with approvals, with even routing for signature? Do you have a problem accessing information once a document has already been signed, a contract's been signed, and you need to access it? And I think honing in on what the pain point is, and to be quite honest, if you're most legal teams, you probably have both pain points. I think I spend at every company I've worked at, I've spent a significant amount of times on both of those major problems.
Awesome. What about for you, Ashlyn?
Yeah, I think that similar to what both Jonathan and Shawn shared, each company is going to have their unique and own why that's driven by their overarching company objectives and goals. And I think really starting from that lens of like, what is the company's goals or objectives through the year or mission? How are you going to meet those and support those? That starts to, open the lens through which you can see are there ways that we can use technology to really optimize the way we're operating as a team to better support that? It could be a volume issue. It could be really just needing to create some more self-service enablement for your business partners and teams so that they can move faster and quicker for deal velocity reasons. So I think that, really need to sit back and understand what matters most to you as a department and a larger company.
Definitely.
I would also say one of the big areas that contract management product can really help facilitate is data. So there's working with your contracts in the negotiation stage, pre-signature, there's accessing the repository and being able to access information in your contracts quickly. And then there's just the overall understanding of both your contract process and what's in your contract through a more data-oriented lens. And I think that's very important and very impactful that sometimes we don't focus in on, but an area where there's actually a potential problem and technology can provide a solution.
Definitely. What would you say would be the issue of not defining the why and just kind of using tech to slap a band-aid on maybe an issue? What would be the problem with that? And this is an open-ended question for anyone on the call.
I think if you don't define your why, you don't necessarily go into it with any measure of definition that's going to allow you to be successful. I think with any technical solution, there is a wide opportunity for you to approach things in various ways. But if you really don't understand what problems you're trying to solve, it's where do you even start? What are you going to focus on? What matters the most? And, if you're at a large company with, tens, 20, 50 plus contract types that you're frequently negotiating, where do you even begin in that? It can feel really overwhelming. So for me, I think what's really important is honing that in so you can at least have a starting point, which is the hardest part.
Hey, Mary, I would also say that if you don't know your why, you're probably not going to get this project funded because in most cases, you're going to have to build a business case for why the ROI of this project is much higher than the cost of it. Right. And that ROI analysis is going to dig into what's the business need, where's the biggest impact on the business, and you'll have to articulate your why and then monetize it in order to usually to get the funding. So I think it's pretty rare that somebody would have a blank check and be able to kind of implement a CLM without having to go through a lot of work to not only justify the why, but to monetize it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with anything, whenever it's involving a change or an implementation, there's a certain amount of work that you're going to need to put forward that is going to be work that's distracting from other work that you could be doing. And when you know your why, I think of it like Shawn and his triathlons, waking up very early to go do his runs and swims and bikes. He knows the outcome is he's going to have a great time in his triathlon. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe the running, swimming, and biking isn't quite worth
it. I love that tie-in. Thanks, Jonathan. So with that, we've defined what it means when you want to make a change. But to make sure that the implementation conversations go well, it seems like there are a lot of considerations that need to be had. So I want to spend a little time here really discussing some of your experiences when you get to the implementation point and the lessons that you learned along the way. Shawn, you mentioned, you've implemented it twice now. But based on your experiences, what would you say are the key components to consider when building out a strategy and a process?
I think it's tempting to go right to and rush towards the item that's going to have the biggest impact on the business and say, let's just do that first. But I usually encourage people to ask a second question, which is, if you stumble and if you have problems, which area is going to have the biggest impact on the business if you do that? And in our case at OutSystems, we decided, for example, to implement the Analyze repository first because that had the lowest level of kind of impact to business continuity compared to Finalize, which we were very eager to get on board. But if we didn't do it right, could have really slowed down the momentum of the sales team. So we decided to phase it and get Analyze implemented first because we found it was fast. And then in parallel to that, be getting ready for the finalized implementation. But whatever lessons we learned along the way in that first Analyze phase, we could apply to make sure that the finalized implementation would be successful.
Actually, question on that. When you are setting up this phased approach, how do you deal with timelines? Do you give yourself a deadline on when something needs to be done, or is it just by the nature of the task, you expect it to be done in a certain period of time?
Well, in one case, it's dictated by, again, the impact on the business. So if you're in a sales-driven environment that's based on quarters, for example, like our team was very loath to introduce anything in the second half of a quarter. We didn't want to have any impact on the sales momentum for closing that quarter. So we decided we were going to implement at the beginning of a quarter. So that naturally kind of set our timeline. And we worked backwards from that kind of target launch date.
That makes sense.
Ashlyn, I know when we were preparing for this webinar, you talked a lot about the order of operations, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts around what Shawn was talking about, the phased approach for implementation, but really what that order of operations looks like, and then what the pros and cons are associated with that.
Yeah, I think that, again, like so many of the considerations when we're talking about success for CLM, it's really like what is being driven by your business and their needs. And so there might be a use where you want to implement on the pre-signature side of the house prior to post-signature, because maybe you don't have your ducks in a row on the post-signature side. You have to go find your contracts, right? And you just want to stop the bleeding and make sure that you have things going into a repository. Or maybe you want to start and phase it out from a regional perspective. If you're a global organization, you want to begin with North America or EMEA and then swap to kind of roll out among the larger global affiliates that you have in your company. And so I think that there are a lot of pros to really thinking about it in a phased solution that's going to work with what your team is trying to accomplish here, to not only, one, provide you an opportunity to build and develop champions that can then foster and encourage adoption across the broader organization, but also enable you to really think about how you're going to make some quick wins, but not break the entire operating business all at once. And so you can iterate over time, you can improve, you can optimize, you can take feedback in, and really make sure that the way that you're doing the entire rollout and completion is going to be the best foot forward for long-term success.
Definitely. And Shawn, what about you with Analyze? I know you were talking about that being like the first thing that you did. And I know we've talked a lot about like confidence of data that you're putting in and really what the repository is even ingesting. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
We had a really tough starting point in that our contracts were scattered between 3 or 4 different systems. And they all had different naming conventions. And so it took a lot of creativity working with our IT team to extract all of those contracts from all those various systems and then to combine them for our ingest into Analyze. And then, of course, if you do that, if you're pulling from 4 different systems, you're probably going to have a lot of duplicates, which we did. So we need to have a process for going through the duplicates. But one of the things that one of our hypotheses was that if we launch the repository and people see data that looks wrong to them, either there's a contract in there that wasn't the signed version, or maybe there's 3 versions of the same contract, we felt like it would stop momentum in its tracks. If people didn't look at the data and trust it quickly, that they might not adopt it. So we decided to have a couple people on our team spend, several hours over the course of a few weeks as we were preparing for the Analyze implementation, just going through and scrubbing the data to make sure that we really felt like the repository at launch we would have a high level of confidence in it. And that paid off for us. So I always tell people, do that work in advance, have people with time set aside, even if you're hiring like a law student or someone, as long as they understand the structure of contracts, whatever time you put into that cleansing and validity in advance usually pays off in spades.
So second, being creative to find that that external resource that might be of help. I know as actually just a recent graduate back in 2009, that's how I got my start, was in a company needed some help with contracts. There was no AI back then, but they needed help getting their contracts into a platform. And I was able to both help them, but also it was actually very helpful for me to start seeing what contracts in practice look like.
How did they define that team, Jonathan? Like, how did they decide who to loop in and bring you on?
Yeah, I think it was at that time, it was a legal department of two,
Mm-hmm.
and the GC recognized that the department as it stood was not going to be able to support the work needed, but that it was important work. And I think going to when we started talking earlier about the problem and being able to identify that this is a problem. And I think just once or twice when you start getting questions about a contract and you can't find it, I think that's probably time when you want to start thinking about this, because I think it's really important as legal departments that our stakeholders look at us as being very organized and being able to stay on top of our work. And I think the area that they are most interactive with us, or at least many departments are, is in the contract setting.
Definitely. For the key consideration of building that team that is actually going to help get this up and running, whether it's IT, it's the legal team, are there any things that anybody on this call should be thinking about when they're building out the team for implementation? And then we will get into implementation and that sort of thing a little bit more in depth.
I'd say one of the lessons learned I had was doing it within a legal silo, and really not having the time spent in advance to kind of going down that path to understand how potentially implementing a CLM could support other business units like security, compliance, IT, finance, and having to start over really at the end of the day, because that was not factored into the build and the selection of the tech. And so really just making sure that you're spending the time to think about like who else has pain points that are adjacent that you can help solve for, and then working and partnering with them to think about how you can collectively not only select your tech, but then implement it. I think not only provides you with more resources, but also ensures, a longer success rate.
Definitely. Shawn, were you going to say something? I saw that you came off mute.
I think Ashlyn hit the nail on the head. I would just also, and it's kind of implied in her answer, but your sales team or whoever your requesters are going to be, like you want to involve them early so that they feel like they had some input into the solution. If a solution is presented to them about here, this is what we did, and they were never consulted, they're likely to say, well, wait a minute, we don't like this, we didn't have any say in it. But if you can, if you had focus groups and input from the sales team, I think you'll have much more credibility at launch.
Yeah, that was really big at one of the companies that I worked for. And what we were sure to do was when we were evaluating the solutions, not having signed the contract or anything, we were already working with our sales team and saying, would this solution work for you? And even testing things out with the sales team, getting demo accounts and evaluation accounts from the vendor, I think is a really good practice to be able to try to work with your stakeholders and see how they feel about things. Because once they've had that opportunity, particularly if it's somebody senior in sales, if there does become some level of objection, the objection will get quelched a lot faster when it says, Sarah, our VP, was the one who helped pick this out. And a lot of times people can be very nitpicky, and those nitpicks tend to go away when somebody in senior leadership over in whatever org it is had a hand in making that decision.
That brings us to our next piece here about like really enabling every team on it. So you've gotten input from everyone, right? But how do you actually enable them? Obviously, training is so important, especially when it comes to change management, right? You're implementing this new tool, and I'm sure there will be some resistance from some folks. So What would you say are like the key things to note for enablement? I know, Shawn, this was something that you really were trying to hammer home about how important it is to get everybody, one, on board, two, make sure that like you're balancing the speed of implementation with the end goal. So I'm curious to hear from you.
Yeah, one of the reasons that this is near, to my heart, so to speak, is that we didn't do this well in our most recent implementation, and it's nothing to do with, it's all to do with us within the OutSystems kind of implementation team, and I've kind of reflected on this and say that we were going for that beginning of the quarter deadline and wanting to launch this like right as the new quarter started. And so the enablement felt rushed. And in retrospect, as we look back on it, we've had, the system's extremely stable from a technology perspective and a functionality perspective. But the problems that we've had almost always tie back to the people who are using it don't understand how to use it. Maybe they, weren't paying attention when we first rolled it out. Maybe it's been, months and months since then and they've forgotten it, or maybe they're a new hire and they never were even told about it in the first place. So, I really think enablement is critical at kind of three key steps. Number one is at launch, really make sure everyone that's a key stakeholder like actually consumes the training. And then number two, at new hire. So as you're going to be having new people come in, make sure you don't forget about them and that they have some module they can consume as part of their onboarding process. And then finally, it's really good to have like an on-demand resource, like training videos that are on your enablement hub that you can just point people to. So when everyone says, "Oh, I don't remember how to do this," rather than having to get on a Zoom and like take everyone's time and walk them through it, you just said, "Hey, here's a link to the video that shows you exactly what to do." And if that video is short, which it should be, they shouldn't have any objection to saying, "Okay, I can watch this 5-minute video and refresh myself on how I do X, Y, and Z." And then that doesn't put a big burden on the legal team to constantly be doing, re-education sessions on a one-on-one basis, because that sucks up a lot of energy if you're having to retrain people one-on-one as you go.
Absolutely.
One of the
I think
things that
that's
I
much better than
think,
my historical approach, which is if you're not using the process that we've set up, your work's not going to get reviewed. So, sorry,
I
Ashley, you
really
go.
like this. Yeah, I really like the snackable content. And I think one thing that, just as an add-on that has worked really well in the past is defining in-team champions who are the go-tos. So they're the ones that you're doing re-enablement sessions on a periodic cadence with, but also the folks that within their department are known as the super users. They're the ones to go to with questions and funnel things up through them. Because what I found in my experience is a lot of times it's someone maybe goes through the process once a year. They're not familiar with it. They don't remember the update you made, in the middle of last year after rollout. And so having that point of contact for them enables them to get the answer without bogging down legal resources, but also then provides you with a touch point as you make tweaks and changes through which to filter communications. So you're not blasting entire departments with, "Hey, we made an update to this workflow process. Here you go."
How do you create that feedback loop, Ashlyn? If anybody gives you feedback, like how does that process work?
I've seen it done a couple different ways. One of the things that I really like is, periodic Google forms or other survey mechanisms to just seek feedback from key users. You can pull data like who's requesting things the most or what departments, and pick a few people to send that in-person workshops and sessions. And then if you've built out a really strong super user or champion group, they're going to inherently get feedback. They're going to hear from the sales team that they don't really like the way that this NDA process is working, and they can, filter that up for you, whether that's in like a monthly or quarterly cadence meeting where you're just soliciting feedback from teams, or ad hoc over Slack or email. I think there's a lot of different ways you could do it. But what's most important is that you're not only receiving that feedback, but you're actioning it. If you don't action it, people will lose trust and you'll stop getting input into how you can make things even better.
Absolutely. Ashton, you also, I know, create a lot of different playbooks, especially for our sales team. So can you walk us through maybe how that folds into enablement?
Yeah, to Shawn's point, I think Shawn nailed on the head earlier when he was talking about that snackable content that's short in duration. I love a good system process doc that has all of the various steps, like for both the end user and for the legal team. How to submit a request, how to intake and triage a request, right? Like the converse of each, and then create corresponding videos, whether you're using a Loom or something that just walks them through.
Mhm.
You can roll those up into one package for an hour-long training or whatever the right timeline is for a new hire as part of onboarding. But for that person who submits one request a year, maybe two, if they forget how to hit the submit button or what they have to input into there, to have that like 3-minute refresher at the ready in a location that's easily digestible, I think is crucial for success.
And I think legal departments can have a failing that we're so used to reading text that we forget that other folks in the organization are much more visual in how they ingest information. I think it's really important to have that visual reinforcement, whether it's the videos or even a document that actually has pictures. It's just extremely
Mhm.
helpful.
Yes, I'm someone who learns by kind of following along. I like to watch a video and do the thing at the same time. So I know that's helpful for me on the marketing team. Anything else to add here before we move on to measuring success and what those metrics look like?
My only thing I would love to add is that once you do roll out something, particularly if it's a process, that for the first month, you are very tight on looking at the behavior and the reactions. I
Mhm.
think you want to make sure it's like any behavioral change. It's easy to default to how you were previously acting. And I think by staying close as the department that's implementing the CLM, it's important for those first 30 days to really be on top of how each individual is interoperating with the system that's outside of legal or even within the legal team. Like, are they defaulting to old processes, or are they actually sticking to the process and really trying to dig in and really trying to like, you're never going to be perfect, but really looking at your scores and seeing like, is this working for the majority of people? And if it's not, really staying on top of it during that first 30 days, and then probably having cadence check-ins, but not necessarily as much focus as you did that first 30-day period.
I would say, just to add to something around enablement that I think is super crucial, is making sure you're giving the why behind the changes. You've
Mhm.
probably talked to all your stakeholders as part of the selection and initial implementation, but that's not something that a new hire who joins 2 months after your launch is going to know, or even maybe that didn't trickle down to like the end user in sales. If they have that context of why, and you have that leadership buy-in across the org that can filter and trickle that down, I think that really helps. And put that in your videos, put that in your documents, in the emails about the changes. Like, explain why we're doing this, so it's not just, oh, legal asked me to do my intake through this new system, I don't want to do it, right? Because that's the quickest way to lose trust and have people skirt the process.
Definitely.
The only last thing I would add, Mary, on enablement is that we're
Mhm.
talking about some issues that folks might have here and trying to come up with proactive ideas to address them. A lot of times I've seen when you implement the right technology for the right problem, it goes very smoothly, and everybody is actually very excited to have a much more streamlined process with legal. We find that with a lot of our customers, is that it actually becomes pretty intuitive for their business processes. And once they do it, it's actually much easier than the alternative process, and folks love that.
And I think that brings us to our next point about increased efficiency, Jonathan. When you make these changes, you're always trying to improve one of those processes, make something that maybe wasn't working or wasn't working effectively or efficiently, and turn it around. So that way there's de-siloed departments, data analysis and insight metrics are more readily available, and also that improved communication, right? So marketing works with legal quite often, and through these systems, we're able to work with you more easily. How would you measure your success or those metrics?
Yeah, I think you start off with your why. What are you trying to accomplish? And then I think I would do the success criteria in a phased approach, right? It's, are we moving in the right direction to cost savings and increased efficiency, rather
Mhm.
than putting something out there and saying, cool, we've hit the goal. So
Yep.
I think in general terms, it's really about trying to figure out what are your more granular success metrics that you can start saying or actually putting you on the path to achieving the overarching success. That's my opinion on it.
Shawn, what about for you? I know that we actually have a great stat on our site from your team about your contract completion time. Do you want to go through that?
Yeah, I think with us, we were, I wouldn't say forced, but encouraged, again, as part of locking in the budget for the project, to identify the key success criteria that would show us, within a reasonable period of time, whether we had met our objectives with the investment. And so, we looked at time to revenue as one of our key metrics, and then also the ability to achieve increased standardization in our contracts. So we had less one-offs, less escalations on key issues, and we could try to get more contracts that were done either on our online T's and C's or at least on our paper versus customer paper. So we defined those in advance, and we measured what they were under the business as usual pre-CLM era. So we knew what our starting point was, and we quantified that. And then we said, okay, we're going to look at this, 1 quarter after implementation, 2 quarters after implementation, and see the progress that we've made. So we already knew going into implementation what we would want to measure 1 quarter out, 2 quarters out, et cetera. And then the key thing is knowing how you're going to get the data. Because if you have to try to estimate these metrics or use it based on, kind of gut feel, they don't work. They really work when you're pulling hard data, either from the CLM itself or maybe from your Salesforce system or other systems of record that are part of the process. But we defined in advance where we would get the data from and figured out a way that we would automate the reporting either through dashboards or through reports so that we could show whether we were successful. And sure enough, 1 full quarter after launch, we were able to show that we had reduced the time signature on our most critical contract type by 38%.
Jonathan Ashland, what about our legal team? How do we pull our KPIs, and what are those things that we're actually looking at?
I'm happy to take this one. I think for us, one of the things that we're really focused in on is support of the revenue function for our stakeholders. And so we've really honed in on understanding the type of volume that we're getting from new requests, unique deals that we're working on in any given period of time from revenue generating contracts, and then the associated revenue amounts that are tied to that, and comparing that against the entire revenue cycle. But we're also just looking at our overall contract cadence and what are the trends that we have. We use this from everything to having conversations about areas where we have opportunities to streamline and optimize the way we're doing things with our business partners, but also just to think about like support plans. We just pulled some data recently to talk about what our support cadence is going to look like at end of year for the legal department. And those are all things that we can get from our solution, which is fantastic. And, that was more contract side, but we do have some reporting capabilities on the non-contract side of the house related to our project management solution as well that help us think about where we have opportunities to implement processes or make adjustments to really support our business teams in a more efficient manner.
And when you are looking at that stakeholder satisfaction, that's just another area to get metrics to see it's in the original CLM implementation, or you're constantly tweaking things and improving things along the way. Well, how did people receive that change? And you're able to get metrics just from asking your stakeholders to fill out surveys and talk about the satisfaction and do they like the new process.
Awesome. Anything else to add here before we move on?
One thing I would add is that I think within businesses, legal isn't typically looked at a function that has quantitative metrics, but I think that's a fallacy. And I think that especially with a system like a CLM, legal is very capable of coming up with a robust set of quantitative metrics. And I think when you do that, the business starts to look at legal differently. They start to look at legal as a team that is focused on the operational health of the business, is focused on efficiency, is transparent, and is measuring themselves in the same way that the marketing team measures themselves and the sales team measures
Mhm.
themselves. So I think you can really elevate the standing and perception of legal within the organization if the legal team is data driven and metrics driven and does that, really kind of at the same level of sophistication that other functions in the company would be expected to do.
Such a great point. And I think as you're implementing a CLM, look for that opportunity to find that one data point that's really going to interest particularly your exec team. I think we've talked a lot about stakeholders that we interact with day in and day out. But if you can find that one metric that is going to resonate with that exec team, they're going to perceive both legal and this tool that the CFO just expended budget for very differently.
Yeah. Jonathan, you talk about that all the time, the data that matters to each team. So legal is looked at as a strategic business partner. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think to some degree it's asking other leaders in the organization what data legal might have that would be of interest to them.
Hmm.
In other areas, it probably makes sense to try to figure out what you might think that is, and to then provide that information. I think for us, one of the things that we did this year was embark on trying to get more granular information as to where sales contracts were in the legal process, and being able to report out to our sales leaders, and not, they're focused on looking at opportunity data, but now we have this next level metric to say, well, $500,000 is ready for signature, and it's the day before the end of the month, and so, or the end of the quarter, and so those sales leaders now look at legal different. You've given them insight that they can now action, and also help them with their own predictions.
Hmm. All right. If there is one thing that you all would suggest everyone walk away with today, and your best practices, the number one tip that you all have, tip for implementation and just building out a CLM process in general. Ashlyn, I'll start with you if you have like one thing you want everybody to walk away with today.
Define success early and don't change it, and march towards that, and then iterate from there. I think the opportunities are endless when you're implementing tech. And if you're continually to adjust what that goalpost is, it's going to be really hard to get there afterwards. I just think that sometimes you can be in that habit.
Jonathan, what about you? I see you smirking.
No, I think that's probably the go-to that I think is
Yeah,
really important, is defining that success. But also, I think it's really important to make sure that you've gotten the right stakeholders involved in the decision. And if you're doing something that's going to affect only the legal department, making sure you have the right legal stakeholders involved and make sure that they understand how everything is going to work, and you will find yourself in a much better place.
For me, I would say that the number one piece of advice that I would give is to make sure that at the end of the day, you're putting quality over speed in terms of your implementation. You only get one chance to launch, and where you still have people's kind of trust and credibility. If you launch when you're not ready, then it creates a lot of questions and uncertainties and kind of a lack of trust in the system. And it will take a long time to recover from that. So I'm a believer that yes, you want to move with pace and with intention and speed, but make sure that you're leaving yourself enough time to make sure that what you're launching is a quality implementation with high quality data. You've done a really good job at enablement, and you're really ready to hit the ground with success. I think you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you kind of under club those two things just because you're trying to hit a date.
absolutely. Awesome. Well, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that we do have additional resources. We have a full page about what CLM is, how to define it, how to look at your success there, and then also how to evaluate contract lifecycle management solutions, really what it looks like. So we will send those out as well. We did have one question come in, and Jonathan, I'm going to pass this to you. How do you use AI to pull data?
Yeah, so here at LinkSquares, we actually use it in two use cases. But we do use AI to pull data from our contracts. And so whether that's data such as the party name and being able to organize your contracts by the parties' names that's automatically extracted from the AI, or dates that are in the contract that are important, or just to even organize the contracts by year. That's as well as, and actually this might be the we use everything the most, but being able to run reports across all your contracts and see relevant terms such as your assignment clauses, and to be able to access that information really at a push of a button, and to be able to answer the marketing team's question as, can we use this customer's logo on our website, and to be
Mhm.
able to run a quick query and get all of the contracts that relate to that. It's how we use it most here in our org. We also do use our new generative AI tools, which are pretty awesome, where it helps us actually review the contract and suggest language as we're going through the contract. So those are the two use cases we use AI for here.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you to our panelists and thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to webinars@linksquares.com and we'll get to your questions. I'll also drop that email in the chat. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.